This film does not give you an opportunity to be truthful with yourself. It gives you an opportunity to continue lying to yourself and just perpetuate this narrative that men are bad, that is going to keep you from having the very thing that you want, which is a fulfilling relationship where you feel seen and heard and valued and men feel respected. It's like a terrible thing. Okay, so Barbie movie. Ed and I have been thinking about this for, it's safe to say, a few days, because we have a lot to say about this film, and it's not what the majority of the world seems to be saying right now.
Which is fine, we get that. It's packaged with a cute, nice bow on it. It's very visually appealing. It's fun, there's some good jokes, there's some great choreography in it, incredible acting, and I must admit, for the first first half of the film, I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I think that's where a lot of the danger happens, because there's several overt messages, really obvious stuff, which you can kind of expect, and there's some also subliminal stuff as well. So what we really want to do is help educate and show people what these things could mean and how they could show up in your own life and your own relationships, because this subliminal messaging, as it were, can be hugely damaging.
Yeah, absolutely. And we definitely feel a duty as relationship coaches to really break this down with our perspective on how we perceive the film, the messages that were just repeated over and over and over again. And when you could see it, you couldn't unsee it. So we hope with this conversation we'll be able to shed some light on our view and perspective of the movie, which is hopefully going to help you not only ask yourself some really important questions, but see your relationships differently and give yourself the opportunity to hopefully have better conversations with your partner, with your friends, with your parents, or with yourself. So where do you want to start?
Well, we should probably start with the beginning of the film. We'll work through, we're not going to cover everything because we'd be here for like forever. So we promised to take our 8-year-old daughter to the film, and we went, the three of us. Our son was being cared for. Don't know why that's relevant. Just some quality time with her. She was really excited. And I was sort of prepared in advance, I thought, and I wanted to be open-minded. I also wanted it to be about her. And we went in and we knew the guide rating. Like, there's some things in it, that the sexual references and some jokes there. And I didn't actually mind that, because for her it kind of went over her head. She just didn't get those things. And I think that's okay for kids, because when you've got a film that's kind of targeted for kids, but then there's some adult jokes in there as well that go over the kid's head, that's good because it keeps it interesting for both parties. I think this film was quite confused though into who its target was, because it clearly wasn't 8-year-old girls, because she was bored for a lot of the way through the film. She kept asking us questions, confused about what was going on. So it clearly wasn't for younger kids.
It's definitely, like, they did so well with the marketing of this film. It's not a film for mothers and their 8-year-old daughters. It's not a film for mothers and their 10 and 11-year-old daughters. Personally, I don't believe it is. Like Ed said earlier, I think they just did a really good job at delivering a message that is not, it's not a healthy message. It appears to be healthy and relevant. I know that our daughter will never watch it again, at least under my supervision. She'll make whatever choice she wants to make when she's older, and that's fine, but I'll not be putting that film on for her again. And we'll talk about a little bit more about why that is. Another thing that I want to say, just I feel like to set the tone of this whole conversation, and this is a controversial statement, and it's, I can imagine that there's a lot of women that aren't going to relate to this, but I've been sitting with this for a few days since watching the film, and I can honestly say that I don't feel suppressed as a woman. If I did feel suppressed, and I have done, it's been from women and not from men.
I mean, you've probably been suppressed by men at some points, but I think what you're trying to say is that it's been more of a surprise because the society tells us that you only get suppressed from men.
Yeah.
Of course. because men are the enemy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so nuanced, isn't it? But I mean, we're just literally talking about the film and the message that that's delivering. I can't relate to that message. I mean, we can go into a little bit more about how the real world and what it's portraying in the movie just is not reality.
Well, let's get into it, because there's some early bits that aren't too bad, and I think you mentioned about the Barbie night, girls' night, every night.
There was a bit at the beginning of the movie where Ken wanted to stay over at Barbie's house, and she was
Naughty
like,
Ken.
Huh?
Naughty Ken.
I know. It was girls' night, and then she went on to say it's girls' night every night forever. They did at the end of the movie talk about how they didn't need a girls' night every night, but what we're talking about here is this subliminal message that we are taking on, whether we know it or not, that our friends are more important than men. And we see this across the board in conversations in society, and it's just a really, really damaging message. You couple this with all of the other themes around men in the movie, and it's terrible.
Yeah, it's an absolute catastrophe in relation to the pandemic that we're under at the moment. I don't use that word lightly, where people are failing to connect in the relationships. You know, it's bad enough at the moment. Divorce rates are higher than ever. People aren't connecting. They're not dating. There's a really detrimental culture around that, both in the dating, the beginning, and also the staying together and the working on people's relationships. And we're not just saying that from the position that we're at. We've experienced it ourselves. So I think for a film to come out like this and attack all these different angles, and the messaging that it creates at the end, we'll get to that in a few moments, of what we can't underplay the importance of that. And I think one of the really interesting things was quite early on when, there's going to be loads of spoilers all over this, so hopefully you've not watched it, but if you have watched it, you'll know what I mean. And if you've not watched it and not planning on watching it, that's great. We've watched the film twice, so we'll have saved you a pretty hellish experience. So one of the, literally the reverse of Barbie.
Can I just say though, I don't think it's hellish.
That's the danger.
I'm conflicted, because I feel like, but going into it with an intention and a clear idea of what it is so important. But I think it's a very good depiction of the struggles that we are facing right now, depending on your perspective of it. But it could be, I believe, a very, very good opening kind of starting point, conversation starter for couples.
I think what I was meaning by that is that it's got so much potential. Elements of the film were really fun, and I think they did certain things really well, but it didn't just miss the mark, it steered things round to a really negative message at the end. And I think that confusion of leaving the cinema and feeling satisfied, or maybe it was an interesting film where you had some laughs, and then going back into your real world life and those interactions, those relationships with other people, and wondering maybe why things are a bit worse because of the subliminal messaging that you've received and how you interpret.
I just want to say on that as well, me and Ed have been doing, he said before, we've had a lot of struggles in our relationship. We won't go into that in this video, but we've done a lot of work to bring mindfulness and to try and be as conscious as possible in our relationship. I noticed the day after, on Saturday morning after watching this movie, I was angry. I was mad, wasn't I? And I didn't really know why. I just wanted space. I felt frustrated. It was just very easy for me to wrong Ed on Saturday.
Usually is anywhere. Saturday mornings especially. I don't know why. It's just key moment.
Yeah. But it was just a really interesting observation. And fortunately, I was able to kind of bring awareness to it and kind of rewind and be like, okay, what's going on here? But even I noticed that subtle as pissed.
Yeah.
I didn't really know why I was pissed. And I do wonder how much that is happening after watching this film.
And I didn't feel pissed. I just felt sad and empty at the end of it. Should we get into some of the nuggets? So early on, when Ken and Barbie go into the real world, Ken's like, this is literally the reverse of Barbie Land. Okay, so the scene has been set that the real world is the in fact opposite. So any comparisons we're making, we're not exaggerating. This is the film creators themselves saying that, you know, Barbie Land and the real world are supposed to be polar opposites of each other, certainly in terms of men and women, masculinity, femininity. And then, like, you know, pretty early on, you know, Margot's character, Barbie, receives a lot of negative male attention. What did you experience when you saw that? I've
been groped. You know, I'm not saying that that's okay.
Don't marginalise it.
No.
That's not okay.
It's not okay. It's not okay. It has happened. I have been objectified by men. You know, I have said the sexual trauma. Like, I think a lot of women can relate to that. And there was something that Barbie said, you know, that her kind of consciousness and attention has an undertone of violence. I could relate to that. My issue in the movie, and I understand that things are exaggerated. I understand that they're wanting to make a point, but the point that they're trying to make is exactly our kind of argument here. But the way that she was in public with her boyfriend, and some guy just comes up to her and slaps her on the arse. I don't know an instance in which that has ever happened. She turns around and punches him in the face and then gets arrested. I don't know a woman that has ever been arrested for retaliating in that way to a guy. Now, I guess what I'm trying to say here is...
We're not saying it never happened.
No, but I think they're going so far out with the point that they're trying to make.
It's like 70 years ago type attitudes.
And I just feel like if you're going to make a statement like that, you can't then go so far out with the point that you're trying your hardest to prove, when actually in reality that happens so much less, and it isn't most women's experience. But what I see happening here globally is women are like, yes, men are back, like, without even knowing that is what is happening to your subconscious. You were like, yeah, fuckers, bastards. And it's just so damaging.
And all the men in the film, at various points, I mean, the cops, when she gets arrested, they're all creeps. Every man in the film is a creep, evil, emasculated or weak. There's no positive male role models in the entire film whatsoever.
There's not one.
But we'll get to that in a few moments.
Something I want to say just really quickly, because I don't think we said this at the beginning, but it's something that we both believe is just so important, is if you are thinking at this point, guys, this is just a film, chill, relax. The reality is the way that we take on information and the way that we consume things through media, especially films, is just so profound. To overlook that would be doing ourselves and our relationships just such a huge disservice.
And to combine that with, we don't learn it from our parents, really, unless we've got particularly good role models there. We don't really learn it from school. We don't learn it from any other real areas in life. A lot of people are just fumbling through relationships, just trying to do a better one than the previous relationship they're in. So really, films like this, especially packaged in this way, are the perfect delivery mechanism to inject people's minds with another idea.
Absolutely, and it makes me sad. And it's just so easy to say that it's just a film. It's easy to say, why are you taking it so seriously? But honestly, Barbie takes itself very seriously. And that was something that I realised very, very quickly with this film. It's not as light-hearted as it's not in any way, the way it was marketed, light-hearted. We can't just sit here and be like, oh, it's just a film.
There's the dad where the mother and daughter role, and it cuts back to the dad, and the only thing he's doing is just sat on the sofa playing or using what we expect as Gillingham. And I've done that, so that was funny in the moment. But then there's a lot of these open loops, and you think, okay, well, maybe the dad's maybe going to have some sort of role later where he's clearly not useless, but no, that doesn't happen. It's just confirmed later at the end where he says something silly, wrong, and is corrected, berated for it with the sort of attitude there. And he never has a useful part. And the only dad in the entire film, just no useful role really. And then Ken went up to in the hospital. He's speaking to the female doctor, and he's like, "Where's the doctor?" And that's like a really old misogynistic joke where, why would Ken think that way? He's just come from Barbie land where all the women are doctors and all the doctors are women. Everyone of every higher up skilled labour, anything where people are at a certain level of influence are all women. So why would he assume that the doctor wasn't women? There's a lot of things like that don't make sense in the film.
I was a nurse for 15 years. I can categorically say that I've never seen that happen. And I worked in emergency where I was around doctors all of the time. Again, it comes back to that. They are trying so hard to make a point. They are trying so hard to, create some sort of camp that can be anti-men. And as women, as men, there is just so much work to bring each other together. There is, like Ed said, there is so much confusion around what our role is as women, which was very much highlighted in the film. And I enjoyed that. I really thought that was important. Women aren't sure what their role is. Am I a mum? Am I a boss babe? Am I going for my career? Or what am I doing and what am I supposed to be doing? But that's also true for men. Men are incredibly confused. Men want to be leaders and want to show up for their women, but don't know how to do that. And what was depicted in the film over and over and over again is when a man shows up in his leadership, you need to slam him, you need to suppress him, you need to mock him. And we'll get to it because at the end, they just fucking outdid themselves because they essentially have just said that you are brainwashed if you allow yourself to be led by a man and allow him to make
it's literally
decisions.
the black and white options that are being presented.
It's something that we have personally struggled with in our relationship because of my beliefs around men, my upbringing, and what I believed a healthy relationship should look like. There's just so much.
And indeed my beliefs around women as well, so it goes both ways. I think, and moving on through the film as well, there's the bit where we meet the board of Mattel, which is all men, all 11 of them, which is just not true, because when you Google that, I think there's
6 women on the board of Mattel and 5 men.
Yeah.
Or 5 women, 6 men.
Whichever way you can half 11, that's pretty much the split.
But there's no women on that board.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's like 70 years ago stuff. If you look at the metrics for the 500 biggest companies in the US, all their recent hires, it's something like 79% of recent hires are minority men and women. And I think it's like average percentage of women on the boards is like 30%. Obviously not as good as it could be, but hell of a lot better from where it's coming, and it's on the right trajectory. So I don't see how we can still slam that point home as certainly as brash or as convincingly as they're doing it. I'm gonna get Slinky. Slinky's eating something out of a pocket.
I feel like I could relate to the box. I could relate to, I have a lot to say on this, but I could relate to men trying to put women in a box when they feel like her power is threatening. We do know, for those of you that don't know, my background is nursing turned mother wound coach and relationship coach. I've done a lot of research into the mother wound, predominantly in mother and daughter relationships. And what we do know is that men are inherently uncomfortable with women in their power, and this is
can be very threatening for a guy.
It can be very threatening, and it is something that is still there. Mm-hmm. It is still there, but I do believe that men are trying to understand women. We're referring to the point in the film when Mattel, Will Ferrell.
Big fan.
Will Ferrell. I got Tim Ferriss and Will confused. He's trying to put Barbie back in a box to send it back to Barbie Land, and she didn't want to get back in the box, and rightly so. I love that reference of women being aware of boxes, that men can put them into, but something that I really want to highlight in this video is women can also very, very much put themselves in those boxes themselves. I feel like the reference was men doing it to women. I've worked with hundreds of women at this point, and women put themselves in boxes. Mothers put their daughters in boxes. That, unfortunately, there was a really good opportunity for them to explore that a little bit, but no, it was just men.
Just the men.
Just men. I mean, it was a great point. I just feel like they could have expanded that a lot more than they did.
And then sweater vest guy who's in the boardroom, at one point it says, "I'm a man with no power, does that make me a woman?" Which was just a really weird comment to make, especially in a world like, we're not in a world where women don't have any power. Not the world I've seen, I don't know about the world you've seen.
I think women have power. I feel like women, and this is an uncomfortable truth, it's one I've had to sit with and really navigate, is I think women are afraid of their power. I think a lot of people are afraid of their power, men and women, but I really think that women are afraid of their power. I think it's easy to point the finger at men and say, you are stopping me from being in my power, instead of the ways in which we are stopping ourselves. We talk about female empowerment, and women walked out of that theatre, I can imagine, and this is what we're seeing globally, is women are feeling empowered. They're feeling so empowered. You are not empowered as a woman if you need to emasculate men in order to feel empowered. And if we talk about this through the lens of relationships, if you're in a relationship with a man and you need to emasculate him in order to feel powerful, you are not empowered. If you cannot allow your man to be in his power and feel powerful at the same time, you're not empowered. And that is what this film very much just doesn't touch on.
It's all about the emasculation of men for the women to get power. Even
Absolutely.
later on, the Kens sort of have this sort of uprising and take control, and then the Barbies, they sort of absolve themselves of agency for the beginning part, just like, there's a bit where Barbie's saying, someone in power just do something, and then they're like, no, we can do something, and their solution to doing something is to manipulate the men and bring them into a trap, which was really awkwardly done and quite cruel in the way that they did that. Alan is an interesting point. We're not sure if he's just guy or non-binary, not that it really matters, but I think the way that he's treated throughout the film, he's like an anti-Ken. He doesn't stand for anything the Kens do, so he's kind of on the women's side, which is fine, it's good, but the way that the women treat him consistently throughout the film is shocking. There's a bit where they're trying to escape, the mother and daughter trying to escape, and Alan heroically that's really funny. That's like the beach off joke.
Which actually quite funny.
Yeah, it's quite funny. He beats away all the angry workmen that are building this wall. It's like a Trump reference. And he goes through all that, fights them all off single-handedly, then gets back in the car and they just tell him immediately to shut up.
Yeah,
that's all they say. There's no thanks, or there's no praise of any, or acknowledgement on any level, no matter how small. It's just like, shut up. Alan.
Yeah, and I was very much a woman who...
You were a woman?
One day, believe it or not. And I think that this is true for a lot of women, is we think that men are hairy women, and we think that they should, in the sufferable word, should just do things, and they should just know. And like, why would I thank him or say I appreciate him for that? Like, that's like basic shit. And I mean, this is very nuanced, but him beating off the builders, fighting the builders, I looked at this, fighting the builders, it's almost like they were like, well, like, wouldn't he have done that?
Yeah, like it's an expectation that he would defend them and protect them.
Yeah.
But at no point does any woman acknowledge sort of needing a man to protect them. And that's not necessarily a thing that they would need to acknowledge. But certainly if they're in a position where they needed them, because if Alan wasn't there, they'd be supposedly beaten up by these guys. And that's a really confusing message.
Yeah, it is. And I think that this is something that is causing a lot of problems in relationships. I can't tell you how much work it took and how difficult it was for me to say that I appreciated you, to say that I was thankful for things that you did for me that I thought you should have just done anyway. Like, if we're talking about power and we're talking about empowerment here, I feel so much more empowered when I essentially can open up my heart and be vulnerable and say thank you, even if I'm like, should have done that anyway, you know?
And usually my reaction is that, you don't have to do that, but it's still nice to hear. And it's the whole concept, if you're in a relationship, both sides are pouring in more than the 50% minimum,
Absolutely.
of course, at all times.
Absolutely.
Well, not at all times, but every time that you can. Obviously, that's a different conversation if one of you just isn't pouring in and the other person is. That's, that doesn't need to be a man versus woman thing. That's someone's lazy and the other person isn't. So, yeah, and then there's other scenes where Alan's like in the scene and all the Barbies are talking to each other and Alan's just like, hi, and no one acknowledges him. And he just, it's just like, again, it's that there's no healthy male role models in the film. Not even role models, just decent men that are, in their masculinity and owning that, not at the expense of women. But there's just no examples of that. There's no showing these teenage girls that supposedly who this film is targeted at.
Something that was really clear to me is a lot of women talking about Alan, specifically TikTok comments, that kind of thing. But like, I want an Alan. Like, I wish my boyfriend was more Alan. Like, all of these things basically saying that they want a guy like Alan, like a guy that understands them.
Which makes sense.
It makes sense, but I'm telling you now, women say that they like nice guys, and I believe that the intention is there, but women want to be led. Women want to be taken care of. They're giving us everything that we say that we want, and there's no polarity. There's no polarity.
And nice guys get frustrated because they're doing what women tell them they want.
Yeah, they don't just get frustrated; they get resentful.
And that builds resentment over time. And often what you find is the nice guys that seem super nice ultimately build that resentment under the surface, and usually you'll get bored, and then the arguments start coming out, and that sort of relationship breaks down. And then in the end, you realise that guy wasn't even all that nice. He just didn't know what he wanted or didn't know how to get it.
Absolutely. And, there's that piece, but then there's also women just not being honest with themselves about what they want and what they like and what they actually desire. And I think this is a whole other conversation, but it's just so important, and we're just seeing it so much at the moment online. Like, I'm just seeing so many comments from women like, I want an Alan. I'm thinking, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. Be honest with yourself, and then you actually give yourself a chance at being happy. You actually give yourself a chance at having the relationship that you want and deserve. And you're also giving men an opportunity to understand themselves more, because the more that we're kind of perpetuating this, we all want a fucking Alan, men are continuing to think that that's how they should be, and it's just perpetuating this cycle. These successful, independent women want a relationship, want a man, but the pool of high value men is so, and by high value, I'm not talking about a wet fish like Alan. The pool.
Brutal.
I don't want a man that's going to agree with me all the time. I think that's what we're talking about here. You don't want a guy to agree with you all the time. You want a guy to put you in your place.
Well, with love.
With love.
Yeah.
It's leadership.
Yeah. Because women test men often, and when they don't get any pushback, they get bored really quickly.
Absolutely.
And that's the Alan problem.
Yeah, and I know that there's going to be a lot of people watching this like, you're full of shit, whatever. I don't want that. But it takes a lot of humility to begin to admit these things to yourself. One thing that I do know is I am not only so much happier as a result of admitting and being more truthful, and this may not be true for you. It may not be true for you, and that's okay. But I really think that we need to start giving ourselves an opportunity to be truthful. This film does not give you an opportunity to be truthful with yourself. It gives you an opportunity to continue lying to yourself and just perpetuate this narrative that men are bad, that is going to keep you from having the very thing that you want, which is a fulfilling relationship where you feel seen and heard and valued and men feel respected. Ed's made a lot of notes. I can't read Ed's writing. So
no one can read my writing, it's like a secret code.
Yeah, like, I love a maid outfit, you know, I love a maid outfit like the next person, but the use of the outfits for the point that they were trying to make, it just felt really reaching.
The patriarchy was such a magical spell that in seconds of Ken getting back, he'd managed to overthrow all the women, and they were just servants and
fell under the spell of the patriarchy. So of course, naturally, they all put on their maid outfits to serve men. And then when they unbrainwashed later on in the film, and the other Barbies unbrainwashed the Barbies that are in the maid outfit, they were like, "Would you like some trousers?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I'm not gonna lie, like, I get it, like, it's so nuanced, like, I get it, I love wearing trousers, like, I couldn't imagine a world in which I wasn't able to wear trousers, and I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful that I have that opportunity and that choice. But we're in 2023. I don't think any woman has ever felt like she can't wear trousers, you know, and I'm just going to name it as well, because as I'm saying that, there have been moments when, you know, there's a guy and he thinks you look great in a skirt or whatever, and he's probably encouraging you to wear that. That's happened to me, and there is a part of me that feels like I want to push back. I feel resentful, you know, and when I talk about that, I guess we are talking about those subtle themes of women feeling suppressed and how that can pass on and stay with us. But the reality is we do have a choice, and it's not coming from men saying you cannot wear trousers. It's coming from us feeling like we can't. And that is where the real work is. And again, it just comes back to the fact that I feel like the film had an opportunity to explore how we hold ourselves prisoners to these beliefs, and it didn't, just blamed it on men.
It was also the smallpox reference. They had no defense to this. Again, absolving themselves of agency.
Yeah.
Like, patriarchy is so magical and so powerful that they just had no other option but to just succumb.
Which is just so damaging. I mean, I feel like we don't even need to. That is so damaging. And
it's like all he's doing, all Ken is doing, he acknowledges this, is like, how do you feel? Like, this is after she comes in, she realizes how bad this patriarchy uprising is. And Ken's like, how does it feel now? Like, it doesn't feel good. And all he's doing really is, to that point, he's pretty much everything that's been shown, apart from the maid outfits, is more or less the reverse, and just showing her how he's been treated all this time. Which she does make, Barbie makes a small sort of apology and acknowledgement for later in the film, but that is the only admission throughout the whole thing. And as we'll get to at the end, things don't even improve, like nothing even changes.
No, there is an illusion that things change. I think they've been very clever with this film and the way that they've, just put a little bit of that there in the end to pacify, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, it allows people to kid themselves that at the end of the film, the balance between the Kens and the Barbies is more equaled out and everyone can feel good leaving the cinema. But that's not the case. There's actually the bit at the end where, Ken's like asking for some power in Parliament. Sorry, not Parliament. The American version of it, the Barbie Land version of it, and they're not allowed any, like, they start on the lowest level. Yeah. So it really confirms that
people are going to see what they want to see. and they're going to believe what they want to believe based on what they already believe and what feels safe and all of these things. But yeah, that bit at the end, you know, I fucking wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to, and I remember thinking, shit, like they're going to bring this back. Like they're gonna really bring this back around, and they didn't. They did just enough with the few like misandry comments like thrown in there. Like it just wasn't. You know, I still very much left the film feeling just very, very sad and very disappointed.
I think what the film does really well is makes women feel seen, and to some extent men as well. You know, I think there are certain struggles that Ken was going through, obviously a lot of the struggles that Barbie was going through, but that's obviously the focus that you'd expect. So it was nice to see that certain struggles that Ken was seeing, and that both were seen in women in general. But I feel that was more of just enough to make a feeling of equality throughout the film, while not actually providing it.
I do wonder how many men who, and if you're listening to this and you feel like that, then we would love to hear from you. Like, I'd be really interested to know how many men have a sense of, there's just a sense of something that's lingering, because I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Because I think it kind of touched on it for men, but it just, unfortunately, there was just so much kind of going against them in the film that I think it would have been very hard to walk out of that feeling really quite empowered as a man. I don't think many men did.
No, because Ken wasn't, his voice of what his needs were and his just getting listened to on a basic level wasn't acknowledged or provided.
It still feels quite gaslighting for men, because I don't know, like I tend to like play things out, and I don't know if that's good or not, but like I could imagine, like, you know, you go with your partner to see the film and you're both discussing it after, and he's like, yeah, you know, you know, or maybe tries to bring up how he feels in some way that might challenge the film. And I could imagine a lot of women are like, what do you mean, like you don't feel seen, or like, you know, you just had that whole scene at the end. Like I could just imagine there's quite a lot of gaslighting and invalidating. I'd put it this way, I don't think it's given anyone the tools for their relationship to create more connection.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing from those of you who have seen it as a couple and then had discussions and conversations afterwards, and what those have looked like.
Oh my gosh, that was a big one for me. Like when America Ferrera said it's impossible to be a woman. I disagree. I disagree. I don't think it is impossible to be a woman. I think that is a story. It's one that I subscribe to. Again, it kind of comes back to that agency and how women just aren't overly truthful with ourselves. And I think it's a very comforting story to attach to when you feel unsafe in the world, because you feel unsafe with yourself as a woman. And this is where the mother-daughter relationship plays a big part in that. But I don't think it's impossible to be a woman at all. I think it's very possible to be a woman. I think that women are confused and afraid, and, you know, they don't feel safe with themselves. They don't feel safe with the world. They don't feel safe with men. They don't even feel as safe with the children as they want to feel. Like, if we're really honest with ourselves.
Why do you think that is? The short answer.
Why women don't feel safe with their children? I feel like women, there's a large undercurrent that was highlighted in this film, that women don't feel enough. When you don't feel enough, you find it very, very hard to receive. And your children love you in a way that is incredibly scary to your nervous system, when you feel like you don't deserve that unconditional love that is coming at you in torrents. And it's hard to feel safe with that. Yeah, absolutely. Again, it kind of comes back to, when I think about both my children, we have a girl and a boy, but I am very hyper aware that they are watching. They are watching how I speak to myself, they are watching how we speak to each other, how we relate to each other, how we navigate conflict, how we have difficult conversations, like all of these
how
things.
we view the world as
Absolutely.
well, our understanding of the world, what events and things mean, what we make them mean.
absolutely. And you know, if I subscribe to the narrative that it's impossible to be a woman, what fucking chance does my daughter have? But my concern, very much my concern, is that so many women are walking out of that film feeling like, yeah, it is impossible to be a woman. It is. No. And to not consider the ramifications of adopting that kind of belief, I think, is just a huge disservice, not only to yourself, but to your relationships and to your children. There is so much contradictions in this film. There is an empowering message, very much coupled with a message that's keeping you very stuck, keeping you very identified with your story and your pain and your trauma, which your mind is going to want to do anyway. Like, you don't need much help with that, but that film is helping you do that. They hide it so well. Well, not to me and not to a lot, but they also do hide it very, very well. If a woman feels empowered after watching that film, like, that's amazing. But you do have to question what that empowerment is underpinned by. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, if you start dismantling that foundation of what it's underpinned by, it's not very stable. And it's usually anchored in something outside of yourself.
Something outside of your control. Like in a lot of, obviously the theme in this film is men.
Which isn't empowering.
One thing you made a point of, going back to the notes, was you can't be shamed for what you own.
Yeah. I talk about that a lot. Like, you cannot be shamed for what you own. You know, when you start looking at your shadow and looking at your shame and all of these beliefs that are suppressing you, essentially the parts of yourself that you've unowned, you can't be shamed once you start to own them. But what's happening in this film, or at least the message of this film, is not own it, it's blame it, blame men. Whether you realise it or not, that is what is happening in this film. And what is happening globally in society, like, it's happening everywhere. And, you know, if you want what you say you want, then you've got to stop blaming men. If they stand a chance, right?
If they stand a chance to become the men that you want them to be.
Yeah.
You know, that you feel you need them to be. You know, we see this so much where, you know, men and women both do this with the opposite sex. But for example, a woman might say, "Where are all the good men?" And then with the actions and the shields that they have up, it creates this this masculine front as a survival mechanism, and men either don't have the tools or don't have the patience to try and bring that wall down.
Yeah, absolutely. You said something about role models earlier. Like, Ed talks about this a lot. I mean, you could probably talk about this now, but like, because you word it a lot better, I think. But like, men don't have many role models, if any. Like, they really don't. And it's so important for women to have role models. Why is it not the same for men? Again, it's something which you start to see, like, you really see. I don't know, maybe I'm putting words into the mouths of men, but like, I can't help but just feel like, is there a possibility that men are feeling like they're being cancelled? Are they feeling like they don't have a voice? And is this even a conscious thought? You know, we're talking about things that are happening quite kind of, talks that James Bond's going to be a woman, Doctor Who became a woman, like, actually not seeing many role models now in film. Oppenheimer just got released, and I believe that, you know, is a male-led film.
I think the guy responsible for millions of people dying probably arguably isn't a good role model, but I think there's elements we can take
that out. I didn't know what it was about.
That's why we should have seen Oppenheimer instead of the Barbie film.
Because I needed an education.
I thought it was interesting how they never really said matriarchy. They didn't say matriarchy once in the entire film.
I've seen that a lot though.
If you what?
I've seen matriarchy, so have I seen it like on social media?
I think people have referenced the matriarchy afterwards when they're talking about it, but they didn't mention matriarchy. And yet, if you played the patriarchy drinking game, you'd have left that cinema wasted. You'd have been gone. Yeah. There's a bit in the film where the Barbies are scheming together to overthrow the uprising of the Kens and the patriarchy, and they're manipulating them and playing a lot of mind games with them, making them feel, the plan is to make them feel jealous, sort of letting them in just enough to then just sort of do a bait and switch, which I found the whole film did a bit of a bait and switch based on the marketing. We've already covered that. One of the issues was that they were taking male tendencies or masculine traits and they were just making fun of all of them. And they were sort of baiting the guys with tendencies. They were basically saying, if you ever make a man feel seen, it's for an ulterior motive.
Oh, you're talking about the fire, like they were singing, the Kens were singing to the Barbies, like in couples, like around fires. And there was one point and they were like, so basically we're going to turn the Kens on each other. That was the plan. We're going to make them fight each other. But how we're going to do that is they're going to sing us a song and we are going to, just when they think that we're bothered, we're going to basically demolish, take it away. Yeah. Like demolish their ego.
And these are those really toxic games that people do play in dating as well. So that it's kind of relevant, but the way that they did it, after that, I felt Barbie was sort of really pensive. I thought maybe she was going to acknowledge it and they would address that, how that wasn't a healthy way to handle that.
Yeah. And look, I feel like, I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here, this is definitely something that we've experienced in our relationship. I think that this happens a lot in relationships. It just doesn't look as overt as that. But I know that we use shame. We feel shame and it's often very unconscious, but we will use that shame and we will put shame on our partner as a way to kind of control and feel safer in the relationship. Like I have used shame as like a protection mechanism and coping strategy many times in our relationship, and you've probably done it to me as well. And that's kind of what it reminded me of. And that film is essentially saying that that's okay. That's normal, like, haha, let's all laugh about it. It's not okay. It's not okay. And I can safely say, if I was around my girlfriends now and they told me that they treated a guy like that, I'm going to be like, babe, that's not okay.
And those things harbour, they build up over time. So it might be a tactic where you can use to manipulate someone once or twice and you get the result. But over time, that, especially guys, they stack that up on their shoulders and they don't deal with that very well. And obviously, maybe they should. They need to find the tools for that, but that's certainly not something really to be played with on either side.
No, and it's, yes, sometimes guys, their egos are running the show and it's just like cringe. Like, let's have a little laugh, but like not at his expense. Like, it was humiliating for them and I don't agree with it.
Do you feel women have been equally humiliated and mocked in the real world?
My experience of a woman in the real world is I have been mocked, I have been questioned, men have questioned my intelligence rather than try and debate me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that happens quite a lot.
Lazy attack.
Yeah, especially in nursing, I would work with a lot of consultants and surgeons, so I've definitely been in that misogynistic or more misogynistic kind of like ego-driven environment. My issue with the way that it was portrayed in this film is just the way that they literally said it happens all of the time, it happens everywhere. And women have no choice, women have no agency, women have no control.
Which makes sense when you're trying to illustrate a point, but when it's all converging down and there's no closing of the loops, there's no saying this was wrong or we should do it this way.
I think that's what it is, isn't it? There was no closing of the loops, there was no explanation, it was very much left open to interpretation. And I think that is that's unfair. It's fucking unfair to to make those kind of statements, have that kind of message, and to leave it so open to interpretation. I can't help but feel like that was very intentional. If you could describe the film in one or two sentences, what would you say?
It's to create the otherisms.
Yeah.
All the way through the film, it's othering both sides. And instead of men and women coming together at the end to unite, and in a way that fits and works.
Because that didn't happen.
That definitely didn't happen. It was confirmed at the end as well, where the Barbies were like, no, Ken, you need to start right at the bottom. Like, there's no place for you on the council. There's no, you're not going to be equal. It's very clearly made at the end. The whole way through the film, Barbie is very much, I never need a man. She doesn't find any man attractive. She's not close to any man in that deeper level. Barbie and Ken are sort of friends, and that's fine. She doesn't, they don't have to have this love affair at the end, and there's like hearts and bunnies and rainbows and everything's magical. But the constant theme throughout was that men and women are very, very separate. They need to stay separate. It's about getting one over on the other side, and women definitely don't need men. That was a constant theme.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if I think about patriarchy, that's how I think about it. I think about like power over another person, and I think that is what they were trying to communicate. But back to what we said earlier about power, like, I could speak for an hour on power, but like people's
Power
hour. People's relationship to power is distorted. So I'd really love you to just think about what your relationship is to power. To think about what your parents' relationship to power was, like what your experience with power has been, because there is a huge difference between power over and like dominion power, like our inner power. And they got very confused in that film. And we're confused about in general, so it's just created more confusion and more disconnect.
The film definitely leaves people in a worse place than it.
Whether they realise it or not.
And I like how it took a bit of a Swedish ending. In Swedish films, like American films, it's all happy at the end, and people go away feeling my life isn't quite as good as the film was. They feel a bit depressed. Whereas a Swedish film, you come out of that thinking, that was a really dark ending, that wasn't great. But then you go back to your own life, it's like, actually, my life's not bad, it's pretty good. And you feel better, so that's why they have lower depression rates. But with this, it was a lot of wounds exacerbated, left open, throw some salt in there, no stitches, no cleaning. At the end, you just go out with a lot of confusion, separation, distance, a lack of understanding, a lack of willing to understand the other side. It's not even that they could have done it better. I feel, like you said, a lot of this was intentional. A lot of this was to feed that propaganda and to get people to buy into their ideology of thinking.
They've got what they wanted. It's divided people. That, I believe, was a huge intention. It's happened. More division is not what we need. We need connection and we need community more than ever before. I feel like I just want to share, given the nature of the work that I do with mother and daughter, like specifically looking at mother-daughter relationships, is the piece at the end of the film with Ruth and Barbie. Ruth was Barbie's creator. The way that it was portrayed in the film is she was kind of like a mother role, wasn't she? There was just, again, this perpetuation of the ideal mother-daughter relationship, and you kind of see this all like mothers do this because they're all loving and all nurturing, and it's just not true. And I definitely was just a bit like, that's disappointing.
I think the ideal, having that concept being idealised it's a good ideal, but it makes a lot of people that didn't have that relationship with their mothers, doesn't make them feel seen or particularly good.
Yeah, and the film didn't have a responsibility to make women that don't have that relationship seen. Like, they don't have a responsibility. I believe we have that responsibility with ourselves. That's a whole other story. But for me, it's just like, if you're going to go there with messages like that and be so like gung-ho with it, it's just disappointing to see, like, I don't know, I guess it makes you pickier, I don't know.
I think with great power comes great responsibility, obviously not my quote. With a film like this that's looking to gross $1 billion at the box office, they have a huge obligation to at least craft a healthy message, and I don't think they've done that.
No, I don't.
So pop your comments below on what your experience with the film was. Hopefully this has helped give you a perspective. This is how we've seen the film. We're not telling you how you should see the film, but it'd be really interesting to see what you took away from it and if anything that we've spoken about today has resonated.
Yeah, absolutely.